Good morning. This is Tracy Drummond. I am in North Kansas City, Missouri with Don Campbell this morning. It is Tuesday, the 18th of August, 2015, and we are going to be doing an oral history interview today, talking about Don's time with TWA, but maybe some other stuff too. So, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to participate in the interview.
Thank you, Casey.
And let me start with a question I always start with. Where and when were you born?
Where was I born? I was born I was born in a home. I wasn't born in a hospital.
Okay.
In a country home between Richmond and Rayville, Missouri. I think the address was Richmond, Missouri. It's in Ray County.
Okay.
I was born in 1937. September the 22nd, 1937.
And being born in a rural area,
Yeah.
did your parents work in agriculture?
Yes, my father was a farmer,
Okay.
and my father passed away at a very young age. I was 2 years old when he passed away,
Okay.
so I really didn't know my father.
Okay. Was he sick?
Yeah, he was sick. He had a heart problem, I think. He had bought a place in town, a small town called Rayville, which is about 4 miles from where I was born, and built a home there.
Mm-hmm.
And right after I was born, they moved to that home there in Rayville, which is a small town of about 200.
Okay.
And that's where I grew up. Went to school there.
Well, how many children did your parents have?
My parents had 4 boys.
4 boys.
Mm-hmm. And
So
I was the youngest of the 4.
Okay. Well, that must have been tough on your mom when your father passed away.
Yes, it was. Very tough.
So how did she make a living? How did she raise you kids?
Well, she worked for a while doing different stuff, but she ended up, she injured her back real bad, and she was an invalid. And I was raised a lot on welfare, really.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have anything, but had a small town, and people were very helpful, and it was a lot different back then than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when we got old enough to work, the boys, all of us, we all went out and worked in the area, worked for farmers. And I started when I was about 12 years old, working on farms, hauling hay and scooping corn and anything
Mm-hmm.
to make a buck,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of the way I grew up.
So Raysville was still pretty rural, and it was mostly agricultural work.
What's that?
Mostly working on farms and doing that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What kind of education did you get in that small town?
Through high school.
Through high school?
Yes.
Okay.
I graduated from high school. Shortly after high school, I went to work for TWA.
Okay. Well, then let me ask, what was sort of the expectation? Because it sounds like, growing up, going to school, was that maybe you didn't have a family tradition of going to college. So were y'all expected to join the military, or was it just to find a good job and work?
Well, it was finding a job and going to work. Actually, I had my 3 brothers all went in the military. My oldest brother went in the military first, and then my second, the brother next to me, he went in and he joined the Army. Of course, back then they had a draft,
Mm-hmm.
and when you turned 18 years old, you had to sign up for the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they draft so many, And my brother next to me, he was about ready to get drafted, so he joined the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And then my other brother, which was next to the oldest brother, when I was a junior in high school, me and him and a couple of my good friends were working in the hayfield, hauling hay. And it was in July of 1954, and they all decided they're going to join the Air Force. So you had to be you had to be 17 to join the service, and your parents had to sign for you if that's the youngest you could go. Well, I was 16 years old at the time. That was in July of 1954. 2 months later, in September, I would have been 17, and I would have been eligible to join the Air Force. So I tried to get my brother and the other 3 boys to wait 2 months until September, and I'd go with them. Mom told me that she'd sign the papers if I wanted to go. So, in fact, one of my real good friend was 17, and his folks had to sign the papers for him. They said, "No, we don't want to wait. We're going. We're tired of this. We're going." So they all went and joined the Air Force. Well, fortunately, I had one more year of high school. I was between my junior and senior year, so I ended up finishing high school, and they all went to service. I finished high school, and I got married young. And shortly after that, I went to work for TWA.
Okay. And what year would you have graduated?
I graduated in 1955.
1955. Okay. And in high school, what were your favorite subjects? What did you like to do in high school?
Well, I really didn't have a favorite subject. I wasn't a go-getter student. I was one of these guys. I love sports. I played football, and of course, in participating in sports, you had to make a certain grade, and I did. I made a grade, but I wasn't going to school to be a dentist or a lawyer, or I didn't have anything in mind. I just wanted to, get through high school, and I didn't have any plans to go on to college when I got out, because I needed a job to make money, because I didn't have any money and didn't have anything. Everything I had to work for. So I always looked forward to going to work for TWA.
Well, how did you but were you still in Rayville when you graduated high school?
Yes.
So you were still in the small town. How did you hear about?
I graduated
TWA?
from high school in Excelsior Springs.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Rayville, well, we didn't have a high school there. We had a grade school.
Okay.
And then we had to, when you got out of grade school, our school district would pay the tuition to the high school, because we didn't have a high school. And I had a choice of 3 high schools: Lawson, Richmond, and Excelsior Springs. I could go to any of them.
Why did you choose Excelsior Springs?
Because I just liked it better. And they had a big football name, for one thing. And
Okay.
that was always, I always thought about that. But I had a brother that went to Lawson High School, and I had a brother that went to Richmond High School, and I went to Excelsior. We all lived in the same house, went to different high schools. The bus came into our town and picked us up, and all the schools were, Excelsior was 12 miles, and Lawson was about 8 miles, and Richmond was 10 miles. So, but I ended up at Excelsior.
Okay. Is that where you met your wife?
No, my wife, my first wife, I grew up with in Rayville.
Okay. And you said you married young.
Yes, I did.
What year?
18.
You were 18, so you married the same year you graduated high school.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Okay.
And 55.
So you were going to high school in Excelsior Springs. That's where you graduated. But how far away is that from Kansas City?
In Kansas City, about 30 miles.
How did you hear about TWA?
How did I get to TWA?
Well, how did you hear about it? How did you know that there were jobs there to get?
Oh, I'd heard TWA. I had friends, people that I knew that worked there, and back when I graduated from high school, jobs were really plentiful. You could go about anywhere and get a job. Ford Motor Company, General Motors, TWA. They were all hiring at that time. And
what was appealing about that kind of job?
what was what?
Appealing. What appealed to you about that kind of a job?
Well, just the excitement, really. When I was a kid in high school, we used to go to Kansas City sometimes, to the municipal airport, and they had a observation deck up above, where back then it was a big deal, airplanes was, we'd go down there and watch them. You could stand there and watch them load the airplanes, unload the passengers, And I just had a fantasy for it, and wanted to go to work in the airline business. So,
were you keen on joining the union too? Was that something that was important to you when you were looking for a job?
yes, ma'am.
It was?
It was, yes.
So growing up with a family who did mostly agricultural work,
Mm-hmm.
what did you hear about the union early on, and how did your community feel about unions? Were you in a pro-union area?
Well, the unions back then if you get a job, a union job, you always felt like we had something to look forward to as far as wages. It wasn't something where you just got paid on your merits. You had a contract, and I knew that, and I looked forward to that. You start out at a certain wage, and you get raises as you go along, and I was familiar with how a union operated. And in fact, right after I went to work for TWA, I went to work from 1956, and July of 1956, and in 1958, our first contract after I went to work, it come up for a vote, and I never will forget the slogan we had for the raise that we asked for. IAM asked for a raise, and it was I was making $1. I started $1.49 an hour, TWA, and they asked for a 49-cent raise. Yeah. The slogan was down the line for 49 or out the gate in 58. We went out the gate in 58.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
We went on strike.
It was your first strike?
Yeah, there I was, 19-year-old kid, first striking after walking the picket line.
Yeah. And every time you hit the table, it picks up on the recorder. So I'm sorry. I just
okay.
It's just it can things that we tune out, the recorder can't.
That's
So
it.
yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
So this must have been really exciting. Like, you'd only been on the job a short time, and here you are. And I understand from talking to Bob Bax yesterday, there were like 5,000 people, who were under that contract, like that it was a really big contract.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of folks who were ready to walk out to demand a better contract. So tell me about, was that exciting and kind of scary? Tell me about that first strike.
Well, it was exciting. It was kind of scary too. I'm learning a lot out there talking to people on the picket line. About the airline and our jobs and so forth. That what happens if we don't get the raise? How long are we going to stay out here? Well, some of the older guys, don't worry about it. We'll get what we want. That's why we're here. We got the strength, and we'll get what we want, and we did. We were only on strike a short time, and the company finally agreed to give us what we wanted, and it was a lesson. I mean, it was at a young age. I found out a lot of things about the union that I didn't know. But,
like what?
Well, the strength of employees together, for one thing, and TWA especially. TWA, I don't know, I'm sure you've probably heard from different people, employees of TWA that you've interviewed, that TWA was a different company.
How so?
It's just like a family. I mean, everybody worked together, and everybody think together. If you needed help in anything, I don't care what it was, if it's your job, if your home, or whatever, there was always somebody there to help you.
Would you say that that's true for labor and management, or just within the union?
Both labor and management.
Really?
Now there was some management people that that wasn't that good, especially later on, I joined I joined the IM when I went to work for TWA. I went to work as a ramp serviceman, loading airplanes on the ramp. And then later I left the union and took a company job, and as a customer service agent. Well, I took a job as an air freight agent, actually. I went from ramp service to an air freight agent, and worked an air freight agent for about 4 or 5 years, and then I went to the ticket counter as a customer service agent. And all the time that I was an agent, shortly after I became an air freight agent, we were trying to organize a union. Of course, we had different unions. We had the IAM, we had the Teamsters, and we had the electrical workers, and they were all trying to organize us.
And so, when you were an air freight agent, which union were y'all trying to organize with?
Who were we trying to organize with?
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. There's 3 different unions trying to organize us.
Oh, I see. You had outside people coming in. Okay.
Yeah, right. The Teamsters but I was familiar with the IM, and actually that was my choice, and that's what I worked for. And I've done a lot of work in organizing and trying to organize. I mean, it went for years before we ever got it done, but we finally did become members of the IM. And but that was, my gosh, early 90s probably.
Really?
I'd have to go back and check. Bob Haynes could probably tell you, but all that time, from the time I become a company person with TWA, I left the IAM and become a air freight agent. That was in 1968. So I started in 56, and 12 years later, I started as a as an air freight agent. Give up my my participation in the union, and then from 1968 to 1990 something, you're looking at 30 years almost.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. What were you gonna say?
I remember the organizations when we organized. There was the Teamsters was one of the big organizing unions then that was trying to get us. They wanted us bad, and
Would you say that they were trying to raid the machinists?
I always thought so. They'd put on a big party. They'd have a meeting, and they'd have all kinds of good food, and drinks, and they had someone at the airport all the time, Of course, the TWA management people didn't like him, and of course there's rules, they had to go by, but they'd come by. I remember one fellow that was an organizer, and back then I smoked Campbell cigarettes, and he liked Campbell cigarettes. He bummed a Camel cigarette from me. He said he'd tell me that he couldn't. He said, I can't buy Camel cigarettes because they're non-union. I don't know who owned them or anything back then, but he said, I like their cigarettes, but I can't buy them. It was kind of funny. But I never was for the Teamsters Union. I always had been exposed to the IM, and I just, that's a union I wanted to become affiliated with, and we just kept working, and finally it happened.
So let me get back to something you said a few minutes ago. You said that TWA was a very different kind of workplace back when you started, that everyone, labor management, was willing to help somebody out if they had troubles. Do you have any examples of that? Even if it didn't happen to you, maybe it happened to a coworker. Do you have any examples of that?
Yes, I do. In fact, like I told you, I got married young, and I had 3 children. Me and my wife split up. In fact, my wife she left me. Anyway, I had 3 children. I had no parents. I had my brothers naturally, but they didn't live close at the time, and I didn't have anyone to take care of my children. My wife left me with 3 children. Mm-hmm. My youngest son is 2 years old when she left. And this happened suddenly. And I was working, at the time I was working the midnight shift, I believe. And I know I was working the night shift. And I had to go to work that night. So I got on the telephone and called my boss, my supervisor. Called him at home. I told him what the situation was. I said, you know, I don't know if I can get someone to take care of my kids by the time they come to work or not. But I just want you to know that if I don't, I can't make it to work tonight. He said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it if you can't make it. Just call at that time, you know, an hour or so before time to go to work. Call into the and tell them. So that's what I done. I didn't get anyone to take care of that night. And he said, don't worry about it. They paid me for that day after I went back to work. Of course, we had a sick leave plan that we had. We didn't have a family leave plan or anything, you know. But anyway, they just showed me as being sick, and they went ahead and paid me for it. I thought that was very nice. We had another incident of a boy that I worked with, and we were working the midnight shift. I remember that very mainly, and he had only been with TWA about 3 weeks. He just started, and he had a sister in Illinois that passed away, and he wanted to go to the funeral, but he was scared to ask for time off, you know, because he had a 90-day probation period and so forth. But anyway,
was that 90-day probation period with the union and the company, or just with the company?
Just with the company.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it was a 6-month. No, it might have been a 6-month with the union.
Okay.
Anyway, someone told our supervisor, it's a real fine gentleman. Anyway, somebody told him about the situation that Paul's sister had passed away, and that he was afraid to ask for time off, you know, to go to the funeral. So Pop Cromer was the guy's name, the supervisor. So he called him in the office, asked him the situation. He told him, yes, his sister had passed away. And he said, you know, I'm going to have to drive to Illinois. And he said, you know, I just didn't know if I could have time off or not. He said, you take time off. You take the time you need. Whatever, you know, 2 days, 3 days, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Just let me know when you get their situation and when you're coming back. He paid him for all the time that he was gone. He'd only been with the company 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. He didn't have to do that. Didn't have to do that at all. I'm sure he covered it up some way in the paperwork, you know, to make it happen. But, you know, that's the way people were at TWA. They just, if you had a problem, I don't care what it was, there was always somebody there to help you.
Okay. So it must have been, if you don't mind me going back again, I'm just interested to find out, and I'm so sorry to hear that your wife left you with your 3 young boys, or you have boys and girls.
I had 2 boys and a girl.
Okay, yeah. With your kids, how did you ultimately? Because I feel like at the time that would have been a difficult. You know, we have more family leave now, you know, and more benefits that cover things like that. How did you ultimately resolve the situation? Did you get a sitter or some kind of daycare, or?
I got to start with, I got a lady that was a lifetime friend, an older lady that was retired, and she took care of my children until I got somebody permanent, and I hired a lady that was also a friend, and she had retired, and she just moved in my home and took care of my children. Just, she was my maid,
Mm-hmm.
done the cooking and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she was there. She'd stay there 5 days a week to my days off, my 2 days off, and then she would, she'd go to her home. But she done that until the kids got up pretty good size, and got to school and so forth. And
So they could kind of take care of themselves.
yes, eventually. And I got married again. Let's see, in 1972. I didn't put that on there, by the way.
Okay.
1970, I think, 70 or 72. I got married again. In fact, I married a lady that worked at TWA.
Mm-hmm.
And
How did y'all meet? I mean, I know on the job, but did she work in your unit or?
she worked in the security department,
Okay.
TWA.
What's her name?
And her name was Dolores.
Dolores.
I met her in the cafeteria at TWA.
Mm-hmm.
I'd go to lunch in the cafeteria, and in fact, I met her, and she started checking me out, I guess. And anyway, that's how we got together.
Okay.
And we were married for 8 years,
Okay.
and marriage just didn't work. We dissolved our marriage as friends. I built a new home. I had a home that I lived in that I built right after me and my first wife got married, and I sold that home, and we built another home in Richmond, and we lived there we was married for 8 years, and then it wasn't going to work, so we just split up. We agreed on everything and split everything, and sold the home. And a couple years later, I got married again for the third time.
Okay.
That was in 1980. Got a wonderful wife.
So you're still married to your third wife?
Yes, I am.
And that is Linda?
That's Linda.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
And she had no children, but she's a wonderful mother. In fact, my first grandchild was born in, 76, I guess, and I got married in 1980. She was my oldest granddaughter. I was 4 years old when we got married. And of course, I had 8 grandchildren born after that, and she's a grandmother. And they all know that. I mean, she's a wonderful woman. She was a wonderful wife and a wonderful grandmother. I just wish I'd have met her earlier than I did. But we've been married now going on 36 years. So
That's not nothing. That's
No, it
great.
isn't.
That's great.
got 3 children, 8 grandchildren. I got 17 great grandchildren.
Oh my gosh.
So
They've been busy.
yep. My oldest great grandson is 19 years old. He got a brother that's 18. In fact, he just started college at Orangeburg here last week. I got great grandchildren from 19 years old down to 6 months old.
Wow.
But I was, like I say, I got married young. I was a father at 19, and my oldest son was a father at 19. That made me a 38-year-old grandfather.
That's young to be a grandfather.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And then my son's oldest daughter, which is my oldest granddaughter, she was born. Well, he was a father at 19, and then she was a mother at 19. So there's 3 19s: me, my son, and my daughter.
Okay.
I mean, granddaughter.
So then you were barely
So I was a great grandfather.
60 when you were a great.
I was a grandfather at 56. 56 years old. I was a great grandfather. So.
Wow. Wow. And you're clearly proud. I can see it on your face of all of your family. So.
Oh yeah.
I've
I've had a lot of my grandchildren have kept me busy. My great grandchildren in sports, and I just doing all the time. I loved it because I love sports. Wrestling was one of the big things, and football. And I had a couple of them that played basketball. In fact, out of all my grandkids, I had every one of them was let's see, all state. I had all state in every sport except basketball. They all state in football, baseball, wrestling, and track. But I didn't have a state champion in basketball. That's the only sport that didn't have.
Well, you've got 17 great grandchildren, so there's still time.
I had my two oldest grandsons. There was a second and third grandchildren were wrestlers, and they were good wrestlers. In fact, they were in a youth program, and one of them was 8 years old, and the other one was let's see, 10. No, one of them was 10, and the other one was 12, 2 years apart. And they're both wrestling at Columbia. They both made it to the finals, to the state championship. And they're both wrestling at the same time for the state championship.
Really?
One on this mat and one on this mat. And I'm up there with my camera trying to keep them going, you know. And the oldest one, no, the youngest one, won his match first. About 30 seconds later, the other boy won his. Mm-hmm. 2 state champions, just like that.
That's great.
Oh, it was amazing. It was fun.
Well, let me ask, did your children ever reconnect with their mother?
Yes.
For better or for worse?
It's not great, but
okay.
They do visit with her and so forth. You know, she lives in Branson, Missouri. She doesn't live here now. Of course, she got remarried and she got another family. She got other kids that she raised. And,
okay.
But yeah, they do. It wasn't. It was after they got older, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, she came around, you know, and tried to, you know, and you know, she's her mother. That's something you ain't gonna change. You know?
Right.
That's something you're not gonna take away. You know, I don't care what the situation is. She just had a different outlook on life than I did, I guess. You know, I was determined that. Of course, when I was raised as a kid, you know, I done a lot of stuff for myself. Like I say, you know, we didn't have a lot. You know, we were four boys, and we were out there doing whatever we could do to survive. You know, like.
Yeah, you were a caregiver for your mother at a very young age, so
yes.
That brings a lot of responsibility that you know you already had when you met your wife, your first wife. So okay, well, wow, it sounds like you've got a wonderful family and a very exciting family story. Let's go back, though, to your work. So you started to ramp services.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who might be listening to this interview, what did that involve on a day-to-day basis?
My job on a daily basis?
The ramp services job.
Loading and unloading airplanes.
Okay.
You know, schedule flights, and I worked in air freight a lot too. Back then we had freighters. We had flights, you know, that didn't haul anything but air freight. And I worked a lot on the freighter crew, and of course we have a scheduled flights that come in, and we'd have an area where we all worked out of, and we have a lead person that was in charge of the group, you know, and had a blackboard, and he'd set everything up on the board. The flights that you would work, you come in the morning and you go in and look at the board, and they'd have you set up, and you just write down your schedule of flights. You know, you don't work them all because you couldn't work them all, but you know, you work the flights that come in, and of course everything was on a schedule of 30-45 minutes ground time, you know, and you had to get out there and hustle to get everything unloaded and get it back loaded. And if you took a delay, you know,
it impacted everything if there was a delay.
It would what?
I said, did it impact everything if there was a flight delay?
Yeah. It would, yeah, it may, you know, get you off schedule, and the flight would leave 15-20 minutes late. Of course, a lot of times they can make up that time, but you know, that's something you just didn't do to get a, you know, a lot of times we'd leave air freight off of the airplane, to get the flight out on time. The critical thing that you had to load first was the airmail. Of course, the baggage for the people that are traveling. You got to get the bags on, and you got to get the mail on, and then express. We had an express freight that went ahead of regular air freight, and then air freight was the last item to go on the airplane. So that's the way we would load the airplane. We load the baggage, we load the mail, we load the express, and then we load the air freight. And when you get to the air freight, and it's getting departure time, you leave it off. You shut that airplane and get it ready to go on time. So, and if we kind of prided ourselves on working crews, certain people on a crew, just like a football team.
Right.
There's me and Jim and Bob, and we all work together, and we know what each other do. Who works inside the airplane, who works outside, and loads everything into the airplane, has the man inside, and back then, the Constellation airplanes were every flight went out of Kansas City full. I mean, it just the front compartment and rear compartment. Of course, we had back then airmail was a big thing, and we had of course the airline had a contract with the post office, and there's a post office right on the facility that handled mail. We take the mail from the post office, take it to the flight, and they know exactly what went on that airplane. And if it didn't get on there, they would fine TWA. You had to load that much mail. The mail they give you, say for Flight 92, for example, if you didn't get all that mail on there, if you ended up having to take it back to the post office, they fine you. So they didn't want us doing that. We put mail in seats a lot of times on the Constellations, with the passengers up in the front, in the front section of the airplane, not first class, but the front part of the coach section. We load it with mail, and then we had covers that we put over it, and straps, and strapped it down. We might put down 5 or 6 or 7 rows of seats with mail. Because the mail paid big money.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of that went on. And air freight was a big thing then too, and that's when we started getting into all cargo, and we had airplanes, and we had quick changers, as Bob Bax was saying here this morning. I think he mentioned that we had quick change airplanes that would they would come in with passengers, and then we'd convert them to cargo. They had the seats in the airplane that were on rollers. They were strapped down. You just release them, roll the seats out. Had a cargo door on the airplane. Load it with cargo, and
well, where would you put all those seats? Did y'all have a holding area for
I had a holding area for them. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well,
and of course, then when we went to jet airplanes, we had jet cargo airplanes, which was, everything was set up on a roller system there too.
Okay.
We had a roller system in the hangar, and we have big pallets of 8 by 12 foot, and the cargo would be loaded on those pallets and then strapped down with straps. We'd have nets that go over them and strap them down, and you put them on it had a big machine that you roll them off onto, lock them onto it, and drive it right over to the airplane, raise it up, roll it in the airplane, and then the roller system on the floor of the airplane, just roll it back, lock it in, and it'd take 8 or 10 pallets of freight, whatever.
So when freight, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
You can, that way we could turn an airplane in an hour. I think most of our cargo flights had an hour ground time. They'd come in and we could unload it, load it back, have it ready to go within an hour. And then of course we'd have to work the freight, take the freight in the hangar and break down all those pallets of freight, for our customers.
Okay, yeah, and that was the question I was about to ask. So when stuff came in, how did you get it ready for, I guess, whoever would then come in and pick it up? Like,
Right.
What is that end of the process like?
Okay, it was. We had a lot of delivery services in, and there was a lot of companies that pick up their own freight, but majority of it we delivered. You know, we'd like I say, we'd roll those big pallets in the hangar and just break them down, separate it, and that was my job as an air freight agent. Once I left the ramp service and went to the company job as an agent, I worked the hangar as receiving and receiving freight and giving freight to the customers in the trucks. Trucks would back in the dock, and load up, and then I'd give them all the freight, sign off the bills and everything like that. And we could work a freighter probably in 2 hours. An airplane come in full of freight, and we'd have it unloaded in the hangar and broke down and for the customer within 2 hours.
Wow, that's great.
Yes, it was. It was quite an operation.
And all without computers.
Huh?
All without computers.
Right, all without computers, yeah. And the municipal airport downtown Kansas City, that's where I started out, and that's where all this was. The only problem we had with municipal was the weather. When the weather would get bad, airplanes couldn't land there. It was right on the river.
Why not? Oh, because of the river.
It was on the river and the fog, and the runway wasn't that long. It wasn't long enough to accommodate them, really. So when the weather would get bad, we'd go to KCI. Have our operation there. We would land airplanes there, unload the people, put them on buses, bus them to the municipal airport in downtown Kansas City, load their bags on trucks, truck them to the airport in downtown Kansas City, and move everything from MCI airport to downtown Kansas City airport. The people would get off the airplane in at KCI, get on a bus, go down, and they let them off at the municipal airport in Kansas City. They go in and claim their baggage, just like their baggage that came in there. But that's about 2 hours later than. But that's the operation we had.
Right.
And that I was involved in that operation a lot of times. So we had a lot of weather at the downtown municipal. Of course, then we moved to 1972, I believe. We moved from municipal to KCI, and that was quite a move.
Yeah.
It's quite a place different than we were used to. The operation was much easier, for one thing, 'cause we had jetways at the old municipal airport. We didn't have. We had the old steps, tiny steps we had to push out to the airplane.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
You had snow and ice on the ground. It was you had to get all that removed so you could even operate. And of course, up there we had the jetways, and everything was inside. It was nice. The ticket counter was much different than it was at the old municipal airport, because at municipal you had one ticket counter, and of course at KCI, when we moved up there, we had one of the most modern airports really in the country, because the way it was built, all the gate areas were built in a circle, and if you were going out on a flight, for example, leaving out of gate 35, you could drive right up to the gate, in front of the gate, get out, walk right over and get on your flight. We had a ticket counter at each gate. You could 5 minutes from the time you hit the airport, you could be on an airplane, and of course then the security thing come along where they had to check everybody out, before they left, and they had to enclose all those areas. And of course, they done away with some of those ticket counters, because you didn't need a ticket counter at every gate then, and as things started changing then, the security got to be a lot of work, and made a lot of difference in the way the airline operated, because people People that flew all the time, though, your business people, you didn't have any problem at all. You know, they learned to get to the airport a little earlier. Of course, it just got worse and worse, and now they want you at the airport an hour or 2 hours before your flight leaves, and you know, it's kind of a hassle anymore. But I was really the only job I really had was with TWA. I worked just a few months after I got out of high school on construction. Yeah, I drove a truck, in fact, and then I went to work for TWA. I was 18 years old, went to work for TWA, and I was 62 when I retired. I worked there 43 years. So, you know, it was my life.
Yeah, definitely.
It was my whole life. And like I say, TWA bought all my automobiles. They bought me 2 new homes, and, you know, they took pretty good care of me.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds, too, like even as a single dad, they allowed you to provide care for your young children that you might not have been able to afford with another job or a non-union job. So
that's true. That is very true.
Because I thought, you know, when you were telling me that story, that's what I was thinking. So when did you? So you did ramp services from 58.
From 56.
56 to 68.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a long time to do ramp services, and you saw a lot of changes during that time. When did you start getting more involved with the union? Because it says here that you were a union steward. So how long were you in that job before you started participating in the union? I mean, I know you were always a member, but before you started, you know.
You mean as an officer of the union steward?
Yeah.
I was not a union steward until I got involved with the union as a customer service agent.
Oh, so that was much later. So
Yeah.
you really didn't participate in the union.
No.
And then it was 68 then that you moved on to be an air freight agent.
Mm-hmm.
And how was that job? What were the day-to-day?
As an air freight agent?
Yeah.
Well,
How was that different from being a ramp services?
well, it was like I was saying. I worked in the hangar at the freight, and I dispatched trucks and stuff, you know. And
Okay. So you were talking about both jobs when you were telling me all of that, and not just.
yeah.
Okay, I understand.
I was an air freight. I was an agent.
Okay.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, and so you did that through the 90s.
I done that until, let's see, I was a air freight agent from 68 until, let's see, when did I go to the ticket counter? I think I was an air freight agent after we moved to to KCI, so that was in 72. 73 or 74, I went to the ticket counter.
Okay.
From air freight.
So then, from 68 to 73, you were the air freight agent, and you were no longer represented by the union.
That's correct.
So, what made you want to take a non-union job?
Well,
or a job that wasn't
well, let's go back a little bit. I at one time wanted to become a mechanic for TWA. Of course, I had no mechanical experience at all, and of course, there was jobs that you could get and work up to become a mechanic. So, I did a mechanic's helper job. In fact, that was in 1960. That's before I became an agent. 1960, I did a job as a mechanic's helper.
Okay.
They had a position of mechanic's helper that you could work as a mechanic's helper and kind of an apprentice thing and work up to a mechanic. See, so that's what I did. I did a mechanic's helper job. So I went from municipal airport to KCI at the overhaul base as a mechanic's helper. I worked there 1 year and got laid off. I was in the union then, see, that was a union job, mechanic's helper. I got laid off, so I went back to my original job as a ramp serviceman. And So then I did a job as a mechanic, fuel tanks mechanic. Now, fuel tanks mechanic didn't require a lot of skill, because what you done then, the old Connie airplanes, the fuel tanks were in the wings. You crawl back in the wings and, you know, fix leaks and so forth, and you can only weigh 160 pounds. That had a weight limit. So I bid this job. Me and a good friend of mine, we both bid it, and we got called for an interview to the overhaul base at KCI. We went up and we got interviewed. We passed everything in flying colors, but we were too heavy. They wouldn't take us. The guy that interviewed us said, "Oh," he said, "I'd love to have you boys," but he said, "I can't do it. You know, there's a weight restriction," and so I didn't get that job. So, you know, then eventually the air freight agent and customer service agent jobs were always open for bid for someone in the company. You know, they could bid them, but and it was most of them came from the ranks as ramp servicemen, moved up to an agent. So that's what I done. I bid a job as an air freight agent.
Did it pay more?
Very little.
Very little.
In fact, that's a strange situation too. In fact, I've got the letter there. I got it there with me today, where I become an agent. I started out at $510 a month, I think. Is what I started out as. I went from an hourly job to a salary job as an agent, and $500 and some a month. But I started out at more than the starting pay because of the pay that I was making at the top of the ramp serviceman. And I think starting pay was couldn't be over $500. Anyway, I started at $510. They made an exception and give me $10 more than normal. So I started out at that $510 a month. And that was in 1968.
Were you afraid of losing union benefits and paying into a pension and things like that?
We had a pension plan.
Okay.
But yes, I was. That's something that I thought about. One thing that I thought about was you didn't have any you didn't have any protection for your job protection. Well, they had a system that, you know, if you had a grievance with the company, something come up that, you know, the company was disciplining you for, giving you time off or so forth. They had a grievance procedure that we could use to file. You could file a grievance, and they would hold a hearing, you know, just like the union did, but they would hold a hearing, and of course you didn't have any protection at all. It's whatever the company wanted to do. You know, it was up to them. If they wanted to give you time off, you had no recourse. You know, there was a system that you could use, but it worked for the company. It didn't work for the employee. That was the difference in the union. You had some protection, at least with the union, because you know, there's a lot of times that not a lot of times, but there was times that people got time off probably that they didn't deserve. You know, and if you had a union, you had protection there. And
like a furlough where they said, y'all don't come in on Monday and we're not going to pay you, that kind of thing. Time off. When you say time off, you mean like a furlough?
Well, if you had a grievance in your job, if something happened that the company would want to give you time off for something that you done, discipline, you know.
Okay.
They give you time
off.
off.
Okay. So give you time off as
Right.
a form of discipline. Okay.
And they had a procedure that you could use, and I was a representative, an employee representative for before we got a union. I represented all the people that I worked with. If we have a grievance, they would file a grievance. I would handle the grievance just like the union did, you know. File a grievance and present it to the company, and I would represent them. And then we'd hold a hearing. The company would have a hearing, and they would call in somebody to be a hearing officer, and some outside, not the person that the grievance was against, and they would hear both sides of it, just like an attorney, and they'd make the decision. It was really whatever the company wanted to do, they'd done it, and you didn't really have any protection. I remember one case that I sat in on. We had a girl, a lady that worked as a customer service agent. Carl Icahn, you've heard of Carl Icahn?
I have.
Okay.
Sherry Cooper had some select things to say about Carl Icahn.
Carl Icahn was something else. Anyway, as one program the company had when Carl Icahn took over the company, he had people that worked for him that went around the company and checked on employees, ticket counter employees. He would give them they had a credit card, an air travel credit card, just like a lot of our customers had, They would walk up to the ticket counter and buy a ticket from an agent, and they'd check you out, and if well, anyway, what happened one cold winter day in Kansas City, this was at KCI, this lady walked up to the ticket counter, and it was a real cold day and the wind was blowing, and she bought a ticket from this young lady, this ticket agent, and she asked her, she said, "Boy, it's cold in here, so why don't they have them covers around the doors like some of the other terminals have,
Mm-hmm.
And she said, supposedly she said something about, she said that Jew boy, I think she said, is too tight to spend the money. We just have to, that was it. She wrote her up. She didn't know it, but she left. Anyway, she wrote her up, and they called her in the office and had a hearing. They fired her. Well, of course, we filed a grievance, ended up at a hearing. She was off 6 months. That's how long it took her to get her job back.
Really?
Got her job back. Anyway, we had the hearings, and the final hearing came down to a hearing in New York. And they had a hearing officer outside the company, and the hearing officer made the final decision. Of course, you had the representative for her, which was me, and then the company had their representative. It was just like a union hearing, But anyway, went to New York to the hearing.
So did she say that woman lied and that she hadn't said that? Or
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Anyway, she said that she didn't say it. Anyway, we went to New York the hearing. Oh, wait a minute, excuse me. We had the hearing here first. We had a hearing in Kansas City. And the hearing officer came from New York. And he was, he worked in the garment business. He owned a garment company in New York. And what was the guy's name? He was Jewish anyway.
That seems like a strange person to bring in for this kind of hearing.
Yes, it was.
If I may make that observation. Okay.
We had a choice. They had a choice of 2 or 3 different ones. Anyway, we had the hearing here in Kansas City. We went to the hearing. We presented our case, and the hearing officer heard, most of it. So we got ready to break for lunch, and he said, "Okay, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen," he said, when we go for lunch, he said, "I would like to have Mr. Campbell and someone else sat at the table with me." He said, "I got some discussion I want to do during our lunch period." So we went to lunch, and he said, I have made my decision on what I want to do," and he said, "What I would like to do," he said, "when we go back," he said, "I'm going to present this to the company." He said, I would like to bring Becky, this lady, I'd like to bring her back to work. I'm going to recommend she come back to work. Keep her seniority of 6 months that she's been off. Keep all her time with the company. No pay. She loses 6 months pay. Oh, I said, boy, that's tough. I can't hardly agree with that, but you're making the decision, and at this point, my decision, I don't have any influence. He said, no, I'm going to make the decision, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to present that to the company. So we go back in the hearing, and he presents this. The officer for the company said, no. Nope. Won't accept that. We're not taking her back. Well, he said, okay. He said, the hearing's dismissed. There will be another hearing set up, but he said the next hearing is going to be in New York. You're coming there. I'm not coming here. Mm-hmm. So a month or so later, I don't remember what the time was, but anyway, we went to New York. And my boss at the time, the station manager for TWA, was one of those guys that was anti-union, and anti this and that. And he was strictly against Becky getting her job back. And so anyway, when we went to New York, the company gave me a Class 5 pass. I don't know if you're familiar with passes at that time. Okay. A Class 5 pass was a positive pass. A normal pass would be a Class 7 pass, which I could use and fly anytime I wanted. But a Class 5 pass was a positive pass, and you could book space and fly on, but you couldn't go first class unless they want to make an exception. Okay. You could go first class with a Class 5 pass. So he gives me a Class 5 pass to go to New York. Well, I check out the flight that I'm going on. It's wide open. There's plenty of seats. So I told him to keep his Class 5 pass. I don't need it. I'll use my Class 7 pass because it's upgradable to first class. I use my Class 7 pass. I go first class from Kansas City to New York.
And that's when they still served meals and it was a nice event.
Right.
It wasn't just...
And guess who's sitting in first class right across from me?
Who?
Representative for the company.
Really?
Yes, and he's flying first class. And why wasn't I flying first class, with that Class 5 pass?
Yeah.
They give him a pass to fly on. They put him in first class. Put me back in coach, but I use my Class 7. I'm sitting up there with him. Anyway, we go to New York, and we have the hearing, and he ended up giving Becky her job back with full pay.
Really?
Yes, ma'am.
And seniority?
Yep, she got her seniority and her pay, and got her job back.
Okay.
But
that seems like it took a really long time, though, to get to that point.
It did.
How did this affect her? I mean, did she have a husband that worked? Was he able to support them? Or?
Yeah, she had a husband that worked,
okay.
yes.
But I bet getting all that back pay was a nice...
I don't remember. She went to work somewhere else, as I remember. But anyway, she came back to work, and it was quite an ordeal. It took a long time.
So, at what moment while you were working unrepresented, at what point, because you said that the Teamsters had been trying to organize the group and electrical workers and the machinists, at what point were y'all like, oh, we really need a union to represent us? And at what point did y'all become more serious about getting representation by a union? Because that must have been a huge, like, you must have really felt, during times like that when you were, trying to
organize.
Well, yeah, I mean,
we had votes at different times between the time I became an agent with TWA from then until the time we got a union. We we had several votes, but didn't pass.
Why do you think that was? I mean, when you could clearly see other people there who were represented by a union. I mean, what do you think prevented this group from getting a passing vote?
Well, I really don't know, other than the way the company operated then. The pay scale that they had was strictly a merit thing. They had what they called a merit raise. When you took a company job as an agent, when I went to this company job, every 3 months or 6 months, they do an evaluation on you. But you got a standard seniority raise actually. But then there was a merit raise. You were eligible for a merit raise each time you were eligible for a regular scheduled raise. And you know how that old boy system works.
Yeah. So were they able to apply those raises in a fair and consistent way? Or were they willing to apply those raises in a fair and consistent
The company?
way? Yeah.
No, they didn't.
Of course.
That's one of the reasons that lean people towards the union, because you work with a guy that you're working alongside a guy that you've been there. Let's say you've been an agent for 2 years, and here comes a guy along that's been an agent for a year. He starts making more money than I'm making. See, because of the merit raise system, which is so that turned a lot of people towards the union. It wasn't a fair system. And the company, of course, a lot of that was where you worked and who you worked for too. I mean, there was a lot of stations that just had good management people, and everybody got a merit raise. If you done your decent job, you got a merit raise. But that wasn't always true in Kansas City. You had the old boy system, and if they thought you didn't deserve a raise, they wouldn't give it to you, and you didn't have to. And so that's one reason that some of the people turned toward the union. But of course, there was people that was against the union. There's people that way. They just thought the union wasn't. But the union was the best thing that really ever happened to us. It just happened too late.
Really?
We fought to become unionized for so long as agents, and it just didn't happen until it happened so late. And of course, TWA was in financial problems. After Carl Icahn took over, he messed things up, and it was hard to it's just hard to operate, and the union really helped out. It did, because we had a guaranteed wage. We knew what we was going to get. We got vacation. We got a lot of benefits from the union. Retirement plan. The union was working on a retirement plan. In fact, they got a very good retirement plan for us right after I retired. They got a retirement plan where I think $1 an hour went into the retirement plan, and I went into the IM plan. They had an International Association Machinist plan instead of the company plan, and there was a few guys that I worked with that retired right after I did it. They got a few dollars out of that before the airline went bankrupt, and American took over. But they had a very good plan started there. Had we have been able to kept going, but and the company and the union came up with a plan in I retired in 99. It's been about 93, 94. They came up with a plan to for the company and the union to work together to make things better in the airline. They had what they called change teams.
Okay.
Have you heard of the change teams?
No, I haven't heard of the change teams. Before we talk about them, I want to know, and this sort of is leading up to the change team, because I was just thinking about this question. Because you said early on the company and the workers, the labor side and the management side, like when you started, that it was really like a family and people would do anything. Can you point to anything that sort of changed that culture over time to get to y'all to where you were when Carl Icahn came on board, or just when, labor and management were more, I don't want to say rivals, but maybe a more contentious relationship than when you had started working there? Can you point to anything in the culture that might have changed that relationship over time?
Well, Carl Icahn definitely had a lot to do with it, but it happened actually before Carl Icahn. It just, I don't know, pressure on the workers, I guess came from higher above, down to our station manager, and like I say, it just depended on the person that we had in charge, because back when I started, our station manager was they were just a different person. We had a station manager that I worked for in the late years that was terrible. And he's had a big ego, and everything went his way, and you did it his way or you didn't do it. That's just what kind of the guy he was. And that seemed to happen, not at all stations, but at some stations. That's what brought the change teams around, really.
Okay.
That's what to make changes in the union and the company people, to try to get along, to make changes and empower the employees, to become better employees and make changes and give them the power to do that. So the change teams is what was set up for.
And the change teams were both labor and management people together.
Yes.
on a team that would go. So what were some of the activities they would have, or what would they talk about in meetings, these change teams?
In change teams? Well, we would talk about empowering the employees, and what we would do. They started this program in, like I say, I think it was in '94. I'm not absolutely sure, but they had representatives from all the unions, which was the IM and the pilots union, the cabin attendants. What else was there? Anyway, I was a committee person for the IM, represented the passenger service department. And when they came up with this program, the IM offered me a position as a change team person if I wanted to be on the change team. So it was set up as a temporary program for 1 year. They were going to do it for 1 year. If they thought it would work, then they were going to make it a permanent thing. So it was a temporary thing for 1 year. Do you want the job for 1 year? I took the job. No pay difference or nothing, But what we did, we traveled to all the different stations on the system for TWA. There was 10 of us. There was there was me from Kansas City. There was a boy from Chicago who was a passenger service also. Anyway, I think there was three of us represented passenger service. Then there was the Pilots Association and the cabin attendants. We were all together as a group. On Monday morning, we'd get on an airplane and fly to St. Louis. Everybody would come into St. Louis. We'd meet in St. Louis, and we'd set up our schedule for the week. And what we would do, we'd fly into these stations. We'd call a station manager, and the union gave us the authority to set up the meetings schedule them whenever we could. So we'd call a station manager, set up the meeting, and then we'd fly into the station and have a meeting with the employees, the customer service agents. we would discuss the situation, the station, the operation. What kind of rapport do you have with the management people that you work for? And we're going to give you the authority to make changes. If you have if you have a supervisor that's not treating you right, that's what we want to know about. We're going to change. You're going to have the power to change that. We're going to give you the power to make changes. Well, it's kind of scary because it's hard to tell employees, you got somebody that's really picking on you, you're going to have the power to do something about it. Yes, you are. That was the idea of the change teams, and it was a very good program, and I did it for the 1 year, and at the end of 1 year, I decided that I wanted to go back to the ticket counter because at the time, I had kids in wrestling and everything else, and I wanted to attend that. So they give me the option, if they made it a permanent plan, and they give me the option of staying or going back to my regular job. So I went back. But it was a good program.
You think it was effective?
It was effective.
And you think the company was earnest and that it wasn't just lip service to try to keep the workers from, to keep morale up, to keep work going? I mean, it wasn't. And then also, you said that was the early 90s? That was about 94 that all this was happening? So that was right after the Eastern strike, and that was right after Eastern had filed bankruptcy and dissolved. So do you think it was in part an attempt to help TWA save itself by finally giving some power back over to the employees?
Absolutely. That was a thinking. That was a reason for it. And
because that Eastern strike must have scared all the other airlines to watch it just sort of, and especially with Carl Icahn having sort of being like a version of the Frank Lorenzo character. Maybe that would be an interesting comparison. Frank Lorenzo, who came into Eastern and sold off all his assets and all this stuff. So I mean, it must have been a hard time to be both labor and management at an airline because.
Yes, it was, and some of these meetings we'd go into where they had for example, if they had a station manager that was a very poor manager and was rough on his employees, his agents, we go in there and schedule a meeting, and we would have whoever we wanted in the meeting. He couldn't be there, Some of them wanted to be there. I remember we had a station manager in San Francisco he's one of the guys. And man, he didn't like it at all, He wanted to be there. No, you're not going to be here. This is not for you, And it's kind of hard if you got a guy like that that's really hard on his employees, especially if you got one certain employee he's picking on, and this guy goes in the meeting and he knows that his station manager, the guy that's really been bad on him, is we're going to give you some relief. We're going to change this situation, We're going to change this situation and make things better in the airline. That was the idea of it. And the IM was behind the whole thing. And, of course, the pilots union, I'm sitting in meetings with TWA captains, and we'd go to the boardroom in St. Louis. We'd have meetings every month. We'd have a board meeting in St. Louis with the president of the company, CEO of the company. And IM would tell him what's going on. This is what we're doing. This is things that are happening. Things are getting better. And they were. Things were changing.
It was a really effective program.
Yes, it was an effective program. Yes, it was.
Okay. Because, companies talk a lot of change, and it's just sometimes more of the same in a different outfit. It's the same thing, but in a different version of the same thing. And so what were some immediate changes that you felt, because you said you only wanted to do it for a certain time because you really wanted to come back and be home with the family more.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the changes that you saw here in Kansas City because of the change team?
One thing was our station manager, for example. He was one of the good old boys. Had a big ego.
Do you remember his name?
Yeah.
What's it?
John Cherney was his name.
How spell his last name?
Chrne.
Okay.
John.
Okay.
John's passed away now, but anyway.
So before the change team, what were some of the things he was doing that maybe was not fair to workers?
Well.
And I'm not trying to paint him as a bad guy. I just, from the point of view of the workers, he was clearly intimidating people or making and things like that, and so and making it a low morale in the workplace. So what were some of the things that were happening?
Well, let's see. He would pick on employees for no reason at all. He would call them names, and they were just scared of him, actually. They were scared of him because of the things that he did. He had one girl or we had one guy, he was a black guy, and he got into it with a customer at the ticket counter. And supposedly he threw water he had a cup of water sitting on the ticket counter, and he threw the water on the customer. Anyway, he fired him, and he ended up getting his job back. But anyway, he didn't like the guy, and one example that what he done was he told him. How did he handle it? Let's see. We had the hearing, and I was a committee person for the union, and we was in the union then when this happened. And he called him. He used the N-word. He did it in the hearing, in fact.
So it wasn't like private intimidation. It was something he felt comfortable doing in front of everyone.
That's what he liked to do. He liked to get you in front of somebody, and then he would
humiliate
you. Yes.
Okay.
That's the type of guy he was. Yes. And in fact, he told me one time that we had a meeting. He called everybody in. We had a change that was taking place. I don't remember what it was. A major change. So he called us all in the office, and he had a big meeting. He didn't like me because I was opposition to him, and he told me that he was going to fire me. He said, "Don Campbell, I'm going to fire you. I'm going to put you on the street." I said, "Oh, John, you ain't going to put me on the street." "Oh, yeah, I'm going to put you on the street." So this is in front of all the employees I worked with. And I had one friend that I worked with that we were real close friends. We grew up with airlines, started ramp service together and so forth. And he was really upset about it. He said, I can't believe that he done that in front of all of us. So anyway, what he done, he at that time, the air freight operation that we had, but air freight business had all gone. We still had an air freight operation, but it was very minor. And he said, after that, he called me in the office and he said, "I can't fire you," but he said, I'm gonna move you. I'm gonna get you off the ticket counter." I said, "I don't want to get off the ticket counter. You're getting off the ticket counter. I'm gonna send you to air freight." I said, "What are you gonna send me to air freight? We don't need an agent at air freight. I'm gonna send you over to get you some training." So he sent me to air freight as an agent. I worked over there for 6 weeks. Never turned a tap. I knew absolutely nothing about it. Everything was computerized then, and the air freight, I didn't have the skill to, So I just sat there and we had one agent on the shift, and I just sat there and talked to him for 8 hours. I'd done that for 6 weeks. Finally, I got back to the ticket counter, and then after, I was very fortunate that we had the committee people that we had with the IM that overseen things. Gary Poos, I don't know if you heard of Gary Poos.
Mm-hmm.
Gary was a committee person here, and
How do you spell his last name?
Gary Poos, Poos, and he was journal chairman. Anyway, he took up my side, and John Cherney. He had a lot of problems with John Cherney. I was a committee person, and in our contract, a committee person, a committeeman, had the option of working the day shift, because that's where the majority of the employees were, and you represent the people. You work that shift, so I wanted to work the day shift, but I wanted weekends off, and I had the seniority to get the weekends off. But when I went to the day shift, I was working 10 to 6:30, 10 in the morning to 6:30 in the evening, and I wanted to go to the 5 a.m. shift. We had a 5 a.m. shift, which is actually not coded as a day shift because it started before 6 o'clock. Anything after 6 and up to 10 o'clock was considered a day shift.
Okay.
So he had a shift that started at 10 o'clock. He had one started at 5 o'clock. Well, the 5 o'clock was considered a midnight shift, and you got midnight differential pay for working that shift. So I wanted to work the 5 o'clock shift so I could get off at 1:30 in the afternoon rather than working 10 in the morning to 6. But I worked that because I had weekends off. Mm-hmm. So I told John I want to go to the day shift. He said, "Well, you have to wait till there's an opening. So when there's an opening, I'll be at the day shift." And I wanted weekends off naturally. So when I went to the day shift, he closed the weekends available on the 5 o'clock shift. So I couldn't get weekends off. And that's the way he treated me, see.
Mm-hmm. That he would change an entire system
Sure.
of doing things,
Yes.
just to get back at you.
Yes, absolutely, he did. Anyway, he left as a station manager and became a vice president of the company now. You can believe this. This is the way the company was operating now. He became a vice president of the company, and of course his office then was in St. Louis. He had that job for maybe a year and a half, and he ended up coming back to Kansas City as a station manager, back to his old job. Give up the vice president job.
He gave it up, or do you think he was...
No, they did it.
They did it?
Yeah, they
Okay.
did it. Anyway, when he came back, Gary Poos told me, he said, "Well, our old buddy's coming back to Kansas City. I guess you know that." He said, when he comes back, he said, "I'll let you know." He said, "I'm going to set up a meeting. We're going to have a little conversation with this guy." So he did. We set up a meeting. We went back and Gary told him, he said, "John, it's going to be different than it was when you was here before. It's not the same place." He said, "What do you mean different?" He said, "Well, you're not going to handle things like you handled them before." He said, you know, it's going to be different. You're going to treat people like you should treat them. And I'm telling you right now, if you don't, we're going to be after you." And he did. So, but he still, he would still treat people bad. He treated me pretty fair after that, but he would always try to figure out a way to get to me if he could. And I was always a step ahead of him. He had a girl that he called her a name. What was it? Anyway, she got pretty upset about it and was crying about it and telling me about it. And I said, "Okay, let's do something about it." "Oh, no, she's afraid he'd fire her, you know." I said, "He ain't gonna fire you. He can't fire you over that." Another girl, he had this is a real crude thing. And on the airplanes, the fleet service people, the cleaning crew on the airplanes, they had a mirror that they used, was on a handle, like a broom handle, and then it flattened out on the bottom, and you could walk through the airplane and you could put the mirror down there and see in the mirror what was underneath the seats. You know, them seats were hard to get down under and get stuff when they clean the airplanes, and they could just run through with that. Well, he had one of these mirrors in the office one day, and this girl went in the office and he was holding that mirror under his skirt.
That's awful.
That's awful. It's terrible. She come and told me about it. I said, okay, we're going after the guy. She was scared to do it. She wouldn't do it. She would not do it. I said, look, let's get the guy. You know, he's been messing with us long enough. Let's do something about it.
And she was in the union.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was scared to
And
do
she
anything.
was
was a customer service agent too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's scared to do anything about it. Another girl was sitting in the office one day, sitting in there waiting to talk to somebody. Anyway, he come out of his office and walked through, and she's sitting there, and he had a pair of scissors in his hands. She had bangs, and he just clipped her hair. Just laughed about it.
He put a pair of scissors near her face. So what it seems to me was that when you and Gary Pooh stepped up, presumably both of you, white men, and said, we're not going to take it anymore, that he then immediately turned his sights on people who were more vulnerable. And maybe, traditionally women in the workplace not feeling comfortable standing up to him. So he was a bully.
Yes, he was a bully.
And you never finished the story about the African American worker who, in the hearing, you said that he called him names, but you never finished the story about how that one turned out.
He got his job back.
Oh, he did? He got his job back? Okay.
But he eventually passed away. He passed away young. He was only 43 years old when he passed away.
That is young.
But this guy was a big bully. I mean, he was terrible.
So did you finally encourage those women to stand up to him and
No, not really.
No?
No. Mm-mm.
They were still They were still too scared?
They were just scared to do anything, I mean, and you couldn't force them to do it. But
well, I think too that now we
But then another thing, the guy, he had a good side to him too. A good example. I worked with a fellow that I rode to work with from Excelsior Springs. We rode to work together, and he was an agent, and he worked downstairs in control, in load control. And I was working a 6 o'clock shift then, 6 in the morning. We had a 6 o'clock shift. And me and him both worked a 6 o'clock shift and rode together. Well, they changed the operation. They changed his hours to 6:30. I was going to work at 6 and him at 6:30. So we couldn't ride together because it's 30 minutes difference, and we didn't want to do the difference in the time. So one morning, I got up to go to work. I was going to work at 6:30 and he's going to work at 6. I got up one morning to go to work. I was getting ready to go to work, and I heard sirens going there in Excelsior Springs, at 6 o'clock in the morning. I just figured, something had happened, car wreck or whatever. So anyway, I got in my car and started to work, and I got about a half a mile from home, still there in town, and there was an accident, and there was a car that had ran into a electrical pole, and they had the street blocked off, and anyway they were flagging traffic through, and I went through. Never paid a lot of attention to the car. Got on to work, and when I got to work, one of the guys downstairs called me and said, "Did you hear about Hank Brown? This is a guy that I used to ride with." Well, what happened, he had started to work, and he hit this pole, his car. Well, what happened, he'd had an aneurysm, and he hit the pole, and he was dead when it happened, Well, anyway, his wife lived there in Excelsior. When I got to work and I heard about it, I called John. Well, I didn't call him after he come to work. But anyway, I called home, got a hold of my wife, and I told her to check on Margie, Hank's wife. And anyway, she did. And Hank had a daughter that lived in Dallas. And he had another
Dallas, Texas.
Dallas, Texas, yeah. Anyway, in order for her to get home for the funeral, she didn't have, did she have any money? She's just a young girl and just got married, and you couldn't get a ticket for her to get home and so forth. Anyway, John called me in the office and he said, "Do you know Hank Brown's daughter?" And I said, "Yeah, I know her. I know the whole family. I know them real well." He said, "Well, I want to get her home for the funeral." And he said, "Whatever it takes, I'm going to furnish a ticket, get her home." And he said, "I know you and Hank were good friends." He said, "Have you talked to his wife?" And I said, "Yeah." I talked to my wife, and she called her and talked to her and so forth. But he said, "Well, I'm going to get her home. I'll get her a ticket and get her home." And he said, "You don't look to me like you're in very good shape." He said, "You're not taking this very good." He said, "When I get this all set up and get this ticket and everything for her to come home," he said, "I want you just going home. Get out of here." Mm-hmm. Said, you don't need to be around here. Too much stress for you."
Yeah.
He sent me home and he paid me for it.
Okay.
That's kind of a guy he was. I mean, you never know what the guy was going to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But he was a giant bully. He really was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But anyway, she made it home for the funeral, and he gave me time off to go to the funeral, paid me for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He didn't have to do it, but anyway, when I left the airline in '99, things were really starting to change in the airline business. Mm-hmm. The security thing was a big thing, and air travel just started to change. It really did. My last 2 years on the ticket counter, I was pretty senior. I was probably the number 2 person in the company on the ticket counter in seniority. Mm-hmm. And I pick and choose where I wanted to work, and I worked the first class section, the first class window on the ticket counter. And the majority of the people that I dealt with every day on a daily basis was the top customers for TWA. The businessman that flies every day and upgrades to first class, and we had a rapport with and everybody that come up the counter, I knew them. "Morning, Dick. Morning, Jeff. How you doing?" And they know me. I knew them. They'd call me on the phone, and tell me, "Hey, I'm going out on flight 44 today. I'm going to Dallas, and I wanted to upgrade to first class, and they tell me there's no seats available. Can you help me out?" "Well, yeah, sure." There was always seats available on the upgrade system. They would hold back 3 or 4 seats. Mm-hmm. And that's the type of thing I did. I'd take care of these customers, and they all appreciated it. And there's always somebody trying to tip me too. Yeah. That's something you got to watch very, very close. I never will forget. I had a guy from Kansas City. He owned a car dealership, and he's one of the guys that wanted a first class seat. And he'd call and he couldn't get it, so he'd come to the airport. I got him a first class seat, and he handed me a $100 bill. I said, "Oh, no, I can't take that. I can't take it." He folded it up and just dropped it over on the ticket counter.
Did you?
Walked off.
Okay.
I didn't take it. I cleaned up the ticket counter, and there it was. But that's the kind of people that I dealt with. They were, and it was. You didn't have the guy down there that bought a ticket and and he's supposed to go out Monday, and he missed his flight, and it's a 7-day advance purchase ticket, and you can't change it. And he's up there wanting to get on the next flight, and you try to explain to him that he can't, and he gets mad, and that's the type of thing you dealt with. I didn't have that with the first class section. I didn't have those kind of people there. And it was a joy to work with those kind of people. And we had a frequent flyer program, and they fly. They got points for all the flights that they took, and they use these points to upgrade to first class. And shoot, we had guys with hundreds of thousands of miles, and they traveled all the time. And that's the people that made TWA. Especially St. Louis and Kansas City. We had lots of people that commuted daily, from Kansas City to St. Louis, leaving on a morning flight and go to St. Louis and come back in the afternoon.
How long is that flight?
1 hour.
1 hour.
And it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed. Of course, I never really had another job, say that I did. That was my lifetime job, working for TWA. It started when I was 18, retired when I was 62. So, but I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Well, one thing we never really talked about was when y'all finally did decide to form the union. And after a couple of failed attempts. What was that like? Did you get any sort of pressure from the company to not do it? Or
was there pressure from the company?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
And what local were you?
Local?
What was your local number?
1650.
1650. So it was organizing those workers with the local that it was already established.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was already established. Yeah.
Okay, so you weren't forming a new local. You were just
No.
bringing those folks in. So, what was it like during that time, getting the vote and finally having enough people who were interested in being part of the union?
You say, how was it hard to do that? You say, or
Yeah. Well, what was it like, kind of, or what was kind of finally happening that this group of people who had, not had a passing vote, that they were finally ready to organize and be part of the union? What were some of the things happening?
Well, we still had some opposition to it. We had workers that still didn't want to join the union. They just had opposition to the union for some reason. And I tried to explain to them, just look at the things that's happened here. Look what happened to us, how the company's treated us, Of course, those guys that are getting the merit raises, that, they don't care. They want the old boy game, they want to stay there, And they just had an opposition to the union. But once we got in the union and they just started seeing the benefits, then, they looked at it different. And they looked at it different. And
at that point, was it still a closed shop? Did everybody have to join if it passed?
Yes, they did. Okay. Yeah, everybody had to join. And that's some things that they thought wasn't right too. I don't want to join. Why do I have to join? Well, the majority said you have to join. And that's why it'll be for the good. And it was kind of hard for me to understand why some of those people didn't want to become unionized, because I'd worked so hard in all those years trying to become unionized because of I had been in the union, I'd been in the IM as a ramp serviceman, and then left and went to the company job, and there was so much difference in the company job, and you have more pressure on you as a company person because you're always scared of protection for one thing. If I mess up, what are they going to do? And I don't have any recourse if I do mess up. If they want to fire me, they can fire me, and actually they could. you really didn't have any recourse.
Is Missouri a right to work state?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it is now.
Oh, when did that happen?
Not too long ago.
Okay. But at the time, it was not a right to work
No.
state. Okay.
No,
Okay.
you had to join a union, so.
Mm-hmm.
But, back then, union dues was minimal, really,
Mm-hmm.
Felt like. And the union is just like anything else. It's just like any organization. If you want to participate, you can make things better.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't want to participate, then you're going to fight it. Things aren't going to get better. You gotta. And we had a few people that way that was always against the union, and why you want to join the union? And I'm not going to join the union, this and that. But most of the people after we got a union was happy with what happened, because they could see that things were getting better.
Mm-hmm.
They had a right to vote on a contract and what they were going to, the raise in money they were going to get, and change in vacations and insurance and all things. You had a vote on it.
Mm-hmm.
And, it had some say on what you were going to get from working for the company. But
Once y'all formed the union, you became a steward?
mm-hmm.
Or I guess once you organized those workers, because the union was already in place. But once you organized, so you became a steward, and then a committee man. So, which committee were you on?
I was a committee person for the passenger service.
For passenger service?
Yes, for passenger service.
Okay.
See, I represented. I was a committee person to represent the passenger service, and of course they had to have a union steward, for each shift, and if they had a grievance, of course they would come to me with the grievance.
Okay.
I'm the committee person that would handle the grievances for them. And attending union meetings was something hard to get people to do.
Mm-hmm. Now,
but
is that different from when you were very first working at TWA, early on and in the union? Would you say there was more attendance at union meetings than there was later?
Not really.
No?
Not really. I attended union meetings pretty regular once I got involved in the union as a steward and so forth. And people were that I worked with that didn't attend union meetings were, after a union meeting, you come to work the next morning after the union meeting, they want to know what went on at the union meeting. I said, why weren't you there?
Mm-hmm.
I ain't going to go to a union meeting, So, after we got the airline organized as the customer service people got organized, we did have more people attending union meetings than we did before.
Mm-hmm.
But like I say, it's an organization that, if you're going to get something out of it, you got to put something into it. And if you just got a bunch of guys that having a meeting every week, and you're not organized, you're not doing anything, you're not getting anything done, well, it was boring at times, you go to a union meeting, sit there, you have the same thing every week, and this and that, but there's always something good that came from a union. There always is, and I'm still pretty big on unions. In fact, before I left TWA, they went to part-time help in the union, and that was a big change. In fact, the union fought that and fought it, but the TWA got in such financial problems that was a way to maybe come out of it and help the company. So the IAM and the company agreed on a part-time program, which they hired people at a lower wage and worked less hours. But that's another thing that Mr. Cherney used to, in his flavor, he'd set up part-time shifts, so people could work the good hours and get the good days off, and have his regular full-time employees working where he wanted them to work. See, that's another thing he used in his favor. So there's good and bad to both parts of it.
Yeah.
But I worked with people. I had 35 years with the company, and somebody with 2 years with the company had weekends off, and I'm working on weekends because they had a part-time position that didn't require them to work on weekends. So it was a benefit in a way, but it's kind of detrimental to the employees sometimes because of the senior people. Yeah. Sometimes had to do things work shifts that they didn't really want to work because of the way the company would set up the shifts and so forth. But the part-time situation was still there when I left, and I guess it might have had the company, if they could have came out of it, it was a help to do that. In fact, you see that happening now in unions and big unions. The United Auto Workers, Ford Motor Company is a good example. They've done the same thing. They went to working people, and they started them at a lower wage, about half of what the regular starting wage was, and they takes those people 10 years or so to get back to the top wage scale in the company. But I guess maybe it's helped Ford Motor Company. They really came out of it now and starting to do real well. So the unions will have a little more room to make decisions. The company show them that the program worked, and they've helped them get out of the financial situation. Now you're making money. Let's change the situation.
Right.
That's why if your union and the company work together, they can make those changes.
So, over your career, have you had anyone that you worked with or that you knew that you would consider a mentor that sort of was there to help you, just when you were getting started in your work, people you looked up to, people who sort of helped guide you and make good decisions in the workplace? Or is there anybody like that you might want to talk about?
I had a gentleman. His name was Pop Cromer.
Pop Cromer. And you mentioned him earlier, so.
Pop Cromer is his name. He, when I went to work for TWA, he was my supervisor.
And he was a company man and not a union man.
He was a company man, not a union man, yes. And but he was a very shrewd guy. He knew how to get something out of you and get you to do things the way he wanted you to do them. And what he would do, if you remember, I told you that we had schedules to meet when a flight would come in. We'd have maybe 43 minutes ground time. Well, Pop would he would take the team that was working working on a flight. We'd have 6 guys working a flight. You had 3 working the rear and 3 working the front.
Mm-hmm.
And he would set it up to where whoever got their end of the airplane done first, and you know, before scheduled departure, he'd buy the malts, or he'd buy the hamburgers, and things like that. And he would always knew how to get it out of you. Then we were all guys were, you know, 18, 19, 20, 20. We were all, you know, young kids. I mean, you know, go out there and work all night and never, you know. And he was an operator. And he'd do things like that. And if you do him a favor, he would always remember to do a favor back for you. I remember when I was a ramp serviceman, and before I became an agent, he recommended me for an agent's job. And he called me one time and he said, "Donnie, I want you to come to the ticket counter. I want you to work for me. You know, getting out there on that ramp and crawling down them airplanes." He said, "One of these days you're going to be too old for that. You need to look forward to something." And that's just the kind of guy he was. And he's the one that give Paul Birds there, I was telling you about a while ago, the time off to go to Illinois to his sister's funeral. Mm-hmm. And he, but then he got, years, and let's see, probably the last 15 or 20 years that I worked for the company, he lost his job as a supervisor. They made some cuts and they cut him, and he went back to an agent, strictly as an agent. Mm-hmm. And but he was a super guy. He'd do anything in the world for you, but he knew how to get the work out of his people. And I always look forward to going to work when Pop was a supervisor, because you know you're going to have a good day, and he's going to be there to take care of you, and not, you know. He's gone now too, but and some of the guys that I worked with at Ramp Service, I had one boy that I worked with. His name was Bob Horde. Him and I started about the same time. I started just a little bit before he did with the company, and we worked together as a ramp service, and then we both went to work as air freight agents, and then we moved up to the ticket counter, and you know, just like going through high school together. And he was a wonderful guy. We were real close friends, and he passed away here just before I retired. In fact, I retired in October of '99, and Bob was going to retire in March of 2000, right after I did. Mm-hmm. And he got sick, and he had cancer. He ended up and passed away. He didn't even get to retire. In fact, his retirement date came up. He was in the hospital. Mm-hmm. But Bob and I were real close friends. And seen a lot of things go up and down in TWA, and he could. Another thing, he was talking about all the good people in TWA. He had when I first started with TWA, I didn't have any money, didn't have anything, you know, and I had an old automobile that run about half the time, and didn't have to push it every day, just about to get it started. Anyway, I didn't have a car to get to work one night. I was working a midnight shift, and I called in. My car wouldn't run. I got a hold of Pop Cromer, the guy I was telling you about. I told him the situation. I said, "Pop, I don't have a car. I have no way to get to work." He said, "Don't worry about it." He said, "Don't go to bed." This was 10:30 at night. You know, I'm supposed to be there at midnight. "Don't go to bed. I'll send somebody out to get you." Now, this is from Municipal Airport to Excelsior Springs, 30 miles. He sends one of the co-workers, and personal car. He drives to Excelsior Springs and gets me and brings me back to work and takes me home.
Nice.
That's the kind of guy he was, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think we're getting about ready to wrap up. Is there anything else about your life or career that you want to discuss or talk about before we finish up? Anything we didn't cover today?
no, I'm just very sad that what happened to TWA.
Yeah.
You know, it was a premier airline. It was, it's a legend, really. And so many good people that worked for TWA. And after TWA was went into bankruptcy and was taken over from American Airlines, people really found out then what TWA really was, because there was so much difference in TWA and American. And the way American did things and TWA did things, you know, it was. I'm just very happy that I was at the age I was and able to leave the company, you know, before the bankruptcy happened.
Got out while the getting was good.
Got out while the getting was good, yep, sure did.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, I want to thank you very much for a wonderful interview, for taking the time to come and talk to me today.
Okay. Now this is going in the archives.
This will go in the archives, but I'll send you a copy of it too.
Okay.
I'll send you an audio copy that you can share with your huge family if they want to listen to it, and a paper copy too. So you can, and then I'll probably also send copies of everything to Bob Haynes to put here in the office for folks who might want to review it. And but then we're also going to be putting eventually this will be online for people everywhere. At the archives, we have people who do research, people who come in who are writing books or theses or dissertations, and specifically I specialize in the history of work and workers, and I've got a lot of machinist stuff, and so because of that there's a nice specialization in transportation, and especially aviation and the airline industry. So people who are working on research projects that involve the transportation or aviation airline industry come to the archives to use our materials. So this will also be used by researchers who are looking at the history of airlines and airline workers and airline work.
So they'll be able to go online and get all this information?
Yeah, it's gonna go. It says so here. It's gonna go online.
Good.
So just so you know, you're gonna be famous. Everybody's gonna be reading this.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate your time.